This episode of Around the Layout is brought to you by my book, Design It, Build It, Burn It. If you're looking to spend hours designing a layout, followed by weeks of track laying and scenery, only to have a deep desire to watch it go up in flames, my book, Design It, Build It, Burn It, is for you. In each chapter, I'll share with you my approach to make each layout I craft as flammable as possible. The book also includes 50 blank pages to use as fire starter. Pick up your copy of Design It, Build It, Burn It at fine hobby shops everywhere.
Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to Around the Layout, where model railroaders come to tell their story. My name is Ray Arnott. So glad you could join us. Coming back on the podcast is my good friend, Joe Mammy. Joe, welcome to the show.
Ray, good to see you. Thanks for having me back. I appreciate it.
Yeah, well, you were guest numero uno on Around the Layout podcast, and boy, and then you were here not too long ago, right around April Fools. We got had a lot of fun with that one, didn't we?
Yeah, we did. That was a good time, and I got to see what it's like sitting in your chair, and I felt like I had some big shoes to fill, but it was a good time.
Well, I'll tell you what, I got a lot of feedback from that show, and a lot of people were saying, you better watch out, Joe's going to steal your job from you. So you did an outstanding job as we swapped roles. You hosted, and I guested, and we got to tell a little bit about my model railroading background, and yeah, you did a great interviewing job, and that kind of lines up with your career anyway. So you know what you're doing.
Yeah, well, I appreciate the kind words from everybody. Yeah, I kind of felt like I was kind of like in a therapy session, and I felt like the counselor, and I just kind of went with it and just kind of reflected back what you were saying, and before we knew it, we had a whole show recorded, and it was great.
Yeah, an hour flew by for sure, and I think we missed an opportunity though for me to lay on the couch and you sit in the chair with the notebook and really get into things. But no, it was a really good time, really great show. Got a lot of great feedback from that. So thank you for you to you came up with the idea. That was your brainchild, and we followed through on it, and it worked out really well.
Yeah, every now and then I guess I have a good idea, so.
Well, you've got some ideas. Let's talk about some ideas, and the reason why I brought you back, want to talk about this. So let's review a little bit from that first show a little over a year ago.
Okay.
So yeah. Well, you were talking about, coming up with a scheme, and you had some ideas about doing, was the Lamoille Valley Railroad. Tell us a little bit about your initial plan so that we can kind of get people up to speed that haven't maybe heard that first episode.
Sure. So yeah, not originally, but last year, on the first episode, I was in the process of planning and building the Lamoille Valley Railroad in HO scale in a 22 by 30 foot room in my garage. I had been through probably about 10, 15 different track plan versions, mad track planner, going crazy, with the layout design. But I kind of settled in on the whole less is more theme, something I kind of preach as, like a track planner. And I really liked what I had. I felt like it really kind of captured the flavor in the area. And again, with the Lamoille Valley, it was such a draw for me because not only was it up in Vermont, like up in the mountains, up in the hills, it spoke to me because, I'm an outdoors guy. I really like to hunt in the fall, and it just kind of really made me, there was a connection there. So that kind of drew me into it. And also, I think I said in the show too, it was very achievable. Right. The Lamoille Valley, they only had 5 Alco RS3s, and once you start putting decoders, keep alives, all the custom paint jobs, I mean, it adds up. So five locomotives, that was achievable at the time. And I was moving forward with that. I actually had about at least half the bench work completed. And then I realized that in my current financial situation, I really couldn't afford to put in a whole heating system and a whole air conditioning system. Years down the road, yeah, sure. But at the time, and for like the next few years, it was probably going to be a little out of reach for me and my family. So I kind of had to put a pause on that and really had to look in the mirror and kind of think about what I really wanted to do. So that brought me to looking down on my basement. Now, the basement, it's not finished, but it's not bad. It's the house was built in 1989, so it's good, concrete walls, nice concrete floor. And the good thing about it also is that it's heated and it's a basement, so it's nice and cool, easily accessible by, stairs from the house, and there's a bulkhead, not a walkout, but, you can't have everything. So I started looking at putting a version of the Lamoille Valley in there, and I came up with a decent place to put it and a pretty decent track plan too that would keep like 2 or 3 operators busy for an hour and a half, 2 hours, which is all I really wanted to accomplish with our group, the Tri-State Railroaders. So I built up the bench work for that. Go figure. I tore down what I had built in the garage, and it's funny, I joke around a lot saying my bench work, it looks like pegboard because there's so many screw holes in it from where I had previously built something with it. But so I built up some shadow box bench work along the back wall and laid out the track work for like the main focus of the layout, which was Morrisville, Vermont, where the Lamoille Valley was based out of. And I had that built, and then just something kind of it just didn't feel right. I just felt like I wasn't going to get what I wanted to out of it. I felt like I wasn't going to do it justice, if that makes sense.
Oh, it does. I mean, what else do you think that you may have been lacking there with what you had planned? And is it that you needed that bigger space outside to make it, what you wanted for the Lamoille Valley? Or was it, what was that decision factor of knowing that, that Lamoille Valley is just not going to be in the cards for you at this time?
Yeah, I think it was... I mean, that's a great question because that's something I struggled with for a while. And I think it's just because the line itself was about 94 miles from end to end. And I was only going to be representing a small portion of it. And to get 3 operators working on 1 or 2 towns that really weren't that industrial based, I felt like it was going to be a real stretch for operations, and I think I was going to be pushing the boundaries on the effect that I wanted to achieve. So that kind of left me kind of scratching my head and thinking like, okay, now what?
Yeah, so it kind of lacked the type of industrial switching that you were looking to kind of accomplish within a layout. So what were some of those industrial areas like in your mind that you kind of wish were in that Lamoille Valley operation?
Yeah, so one of the industries that I was trying to get was in Johnson, Vermont, called EMT, or Eastern Magnesia Talc Company. That was one of the line's biggest shippers. They had, on a typical day in the late 70s, they had probably 3 or 4 boxcars per day and probably about the same amount of covered hoppers. And it just kind of felt like a stretch because that's probably, I'd say, a good like 10 line miles, like rail miles from Morrisville. And in the smaller space in my basement, I felt like that was a little too much compression. And I felt like if I was going to be working that switching lead, my engine might be in Morrisville, which technically is 10 miles away. So I really wasn't happy with that compromise.
Yeah, so you definitely, like you said, you needed that bigger space to do it justice. And the other part of it too, you've got a detached garage now going to the basement. Did you find that maybe a little more appealing too? I mean, sometimes it's nice to have that detachment, but that convenience of the basement is also kind of nice too, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is. And that really was a factor too. I was going out from my back door to the garage door. It's probably 30 feet, first world problems. But in the wintertime or in the cold when it's raining, I'd have to run out to the garage, so I didn't get soaking wet. And then, of course, I'd get out in the garage and realize I forgot my phone in the house. So I'd have to come all the way back and grab my phone, go back up. So, yeah, and my basement is just right down the stairs, and I could be, in my shorts and t-shirt in the wintertime, walking down to my layout and be, working on it or operating on it. And again, the heating for it, the cooling for it, it's basically already paid for with the house. So it was really nice. I kind of felt like that was going to be the way to go for now.
So Lamoille Valley goes up on the shelf. And now we're talking about, I mean, we know if anybody follows Joe on social media knows that he does track plans for other people, but he does a lot for himself and his friends as well, including mine and several others. So it seems like that's kind of like a hobby within the hobby of you doing track plans. But does that kind of make it a little more challenging for you too, because you just enjoy doing track plans so much that it's easy for you to kind of do that change thing?
Yeah, it really does. And it's like, once I get like on this little, I have like this like inkling or interest in another railroad, I'll go down the typical Joe rabbit hole of researching it a little bit and then thinking about a space that I have and start drawing up, track plans and figuring stuff out. But yeah, that's kind of, that kind of led me into, like the next project. Actually, a text from you actually led me into my next endeavor.
Tell us about that text from, my workplace.
Sure. So, it was, I don't even remember when, but I get a text from you saying, check out this cool little yard. And I look at the picture and I see like this small 5-track yard. And I'm like, oh, okay, that's pretty cool. And it was very active because there are a few cars sitting in it. And then you send me another picture of like a Norfolk Southern GP38-2, like going down like this small little industrial branch line. I'm like, all right, you totally have my interest. Where are you? Where is this? And you told me where you were. You were down in Fogelsville, Pennsylvania. Right. So I hopped right on Google Maps. And as soon as I saw it, I'm like, wow, this is awesome.
Yeah. So I'll go back a little bit. I don't know about you, but whenever I have to travel somewhere, and this was for work, and I think the first time I had to go down there for an interview in person. And of course, when I pull it up on the map to see where this place is, I got to drive. It's 4.5 hours, down to the main office. So I'm looking at it, Googling, okay, planning it. And of course, boom, there's railroad tracks. And I go, well, I'm going to find out what the heck that is. So, I make sure I leave early enough to stop there and check it out. And I brought the drone with me and I flew that a little bit. And when I got done with the interview and was checking it out, and of course I shared the pictures with you, and yeah, it certainly sparked an interest of grabbing those Google Maps and then just start following along and seeing where this thing goes.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was following right along on Google Maps. I saw a neat little compact yard. 5 tracks total. And I saw that I followed the line. I'm like, well, where does this go to? This is clearly like a secondary track or a branch line. So I was scrolling through trying to find where it connected to, a more heavily used main line. And I saw it was down in Albertus, Pennsylvania. And I'm like, all right, did a little more Google research and typed it up and found out that is the track that you were showing me, and the one that I was looking at was what's called the CNF secondary. Yep. Norfolk Southern. CNF stands for Catasauqua and Fogelsville secondary. And of course, it dates back to the early steam days when that was its own entity of a railroad. Mm-hmm. It got, merged somehow into the Reading Railroad, and it actually branches off the Reading main line between Allentown and, of course, I'm blanking.
Right?
Yes, I think so. Yes, exactly. On the Reading line on the Harrisburg division. Yes.
Right. What were some of the more appealing things of this that you started to put together?
Yeah. So shortly after the main line leaves like the yard, we're back on the secondary now up in Fogelsville. The line branches off into some industrial area, like a business park or industry park, I should say. And I was noticing on the satellite images, a bunch of the facilities, there were rail cars there. So it was still a very active industrial park. So that, was kind of tickling my fancy a little bit too. Cause I'm like, all right, modern day, it's still very used. And another thing was the car types. There was a whole variety of car types, box cars, covered hoppers, tank cars, center beam flats. And it looked like a pretty interesting area. So I, again, kind of got down on, Google Street View, and I was checking out some of the industries and the names of some of the industries. And I kind of started picture just the natural way that it kind of curved through the industrial park. I'm like, this would be really, really cool to model. And it would be not that difficult to model as well.
Right.
And then I also noticed there was a second branch line, or a line that spur, I should say, that branched off the secondary line. And again, that went into some more industrial areas, and not like heavy industry, but light modern industry, like modern industrial parks. And I noticed it ended at a brewery, and which Sam Adams. And again, that was very active. You could see from the satellite images, the rails were all nice and shiny. And there were some, actually on the satellite images, some covered hoppers sitting outside there. And it all started kind of coming together for me. I'm like, this could be something that could keep a couple people busy for a few hours. But there was still a bunch of like pieces and information that I didn't know.
Yeah, so you're researching it. I'm kind of learning it. I've got make a couple more trips down to Pennsylvania, and I do some more exploring, and then I notice I stay at a Hilton Garden Inn that's right across to right next to one of the spurs, and I think right next to Sam Adams, if I remember correctly. That I think that hotel is up near there. And then like 8:30, 9 o'clock at night, it was dark. It was like winter time or so, maybe January, February time. And then I'm shooting video and sending it to you like, hey, look at this. They're working at night too. And, they were shoving tankers back into there. And, it was just overall, it was just neat to see that kind of, basically short line-ish switching, but with a Class 1 railroad of NS on, that was ownership of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I kind of was doing like research. I went on YouTube. Well, let me see if there's any YouTube videos of the local working, so I can get, some better ideas. And there were a few, YouTube videos on there. So I, of course I watched them all a couple times, and, the train symbols and everything were on there, and they were naming some of the industries. And so I got a little bit more information. So of course, next thing I do, I look at my space down in the basement. I'm like, well, I want this to be something that I can achieve, something that I can build and host an operating session eventually on, hopefully in a shorter time than a longer time. But I decided, like, initially just to do like a 10 by 16 area, I felt that I could kind of capture the flavor and have some interesting ops. And probably within just an hour or two, I had the basic track plan done, because it was so easy to follow the prototype. It wasn't, logged with switches, turnouts, trackage everywhere. It was a generous amount of track, but again, it was all like achievable. Like the turnout count was pretty low, and all the industries there had multiple car spots, which, as we know with operations, the number of car spots is what determines how lengthy of an operating session you can have.
The prototype probably has, I haven't counted them, but there's quite a few customers that are in there, certainly more than what you'd be able to fit in the size of layout you described. How do you start boiling down those industries and kind of making those selections as to, which ones that I see here as I'm doing this research I've got to have, and then maybe some of the ones that, which ones were the more painful ones to put on, say, the editing room floor?
Yeah, that's an awesome question, actually. So what I did, I basically boiled that decision down to ops. What industries would provide the more interesting operating sessions? There were a couple like plastic companies that it looked like had like one or two, covered hoppers full of plastic pellets. There's actually like a string of like 3 or 4 of them in a row, and I dropped 3 of them and only kept one. And I kept one of them just for like an easy industry to switch for a nice balance, what you like to call like the blow and go industries, where it's like a 1-for-1, a quick swap. That's part of the balance with a more complex industry, like let's say a logistics warehouse that has multiple car spots, like door 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And those are kind of, I wanted to have a nice balance of those industries with 1 or 2 easy ones scattered in, kind of like to reward the brain after, doing some more intensive thinking and working at a logistics warehouse.
Yeah, that's it's sometimes it's hard. You want to. We've talked and we've had conversations about even what I want to do in the future and what others want to do in the future, and just trying to boil down. You get in compression. The hard decisions you have to make. What are you going to lose? What can you keep? What sells the area? What reminds you of being in this area? If you've ever been to it, what are the clues that give you say, yep, I'm here, I'm at that place. And those can be some really hard decisions to make.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And again, I'd be lying if I said that wasn't, part of the process as well. And in that initial track plan, I felt like 2 of the bigger industries were sappy paper, which just takes, box cars for rolls of paper, and also, of course, the Sam Adams Brewery. I felt like those are 2 key industries I needed to have on the layout. So on that initial plan, I had them both in there, kind of like as a representation of them, nothing too prototypical. Well, I shouldn't say that. Nothing. It's not tie for tie prototypical, but it's still pretty close to the real thing.
So you start, you talk about putting that initial track plan together. You're selecting industries, and then, of course, you're learning about the C&F and in its history. What were some of maybe the things that kind of surprised you about it, or the things that you learned as you were doing this research?
I think some of the things that kind of surprised me were how many points it hit for me that were on like my kind of must-haves to be considered for actually building a layout. I'd be lying if I didn't say that I was totally drawn to Miami because of Lance Mindheim. I mean, sure, I'm sure hundreds of modelers were, and just I was kind of looking for something like that. I mean, I had actually emailed Lance a few years ago about Miami, and he brought up a great. I told him, I said, I'm thinking about doing it, but I feel like it's kind of been overdone. Am I crazy for thinking that? And he said, no, look at music as a prime example. Bands do cover songs all the time. Why? Because it works.
Right. Yeah. 3 chords in most every song, right? And then you kind of in railroading, you get the, it's seemingly in with railroading being an art, a lot of it's been done before. It's just taking, putting your spin on what's happening here, but now pops up something completely unique with the C&F and then this NS. And I know you had a desire and a love for the NS going into this. That must have been also another factor that really helped you make a decision to go this direction.
Yeah, absolutely. I've always been a fan of Norfolk Southern, from my short time living out in Western Pennsylvania, and of course, Horseshoe Curve. I'm so drawn to that area, and, the big, powerful NS engines going up around the mountain. I don't know, something about the black and white, paint scheme on the Norfolk Southern I've always liked. And also it worked out great too, because that's Norfolk Southern. In our tri-state group, we have Mike King, who models CSX, Mark Herrick, of course, models a BNSF, and I kind of didn't want to do CSX Miami because we already have CSX in the group, and again, this kind of hit on another thing. It's like a different type of railroad in the group.
When you do a class 1, boy, does it start to get easier. You can find locomotives. You can find, it's just seemingly a little bit easier versus the Lamoille Valley where you had to paint. I mean, you talk about, achievable, but you still had to do all that custom work. Now it's NS, and now you can get yourself and get a hold of, basically, a multitude of manufacturers making NS product.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, just go on like eBay or anything, Norfolk Southern HO scale locomotive, and page after page of like engines and rolling stock. And it's like, it makes it so easy. All the manufacturers are making them, and almost any engine type and a class 1 railroad, it's so easy to find. Where, like you said, with the Lamoille Valley, it was achievable with 5 engines, but you had to paint all 5 of those engines. And, that makes it a little harder.
Yeah, which is, for some people, that's a welcome challenge to paint a locomotive and do those kinds of things. And certainly we know a lot of people who have done freelance railroading. We've talked to a lot of them on the podcast. But it's, you knew what your limits were. You knew what your financial limits were. You knew what your time limits are. I mean, now you're working full time. You've got a career that's rolling forward. So you got to know what's achievable for you. You mentioned that earlier in the podcast, and now it seems like you're kind of reeling that in. What you think is going to be achievable for you for your next step.
Yeah, definitely. And yeah, exactly. I graduated grad school this past May, and leading up to the few months leading up to that, I had like 0 free time because there was so many papers turning in. I was putting in more hours, at the office. And now that I'm done with school, it's, a lot of long days and the real world, I guess,
Yeah.
And I don't have as much free time anymore. And I'm like, okay, so this is what everybody else deals with in the hobby of working a Monday through Friday job, but, so I just kind of had to, take a look again, relook at everything, like my available time, how much time I could devote of that available time towards a layout, and what energy do I have at the end of the day or on a weekend to work on the layout.
Yeah, which is a good part of the reason why I wanted to bring you on the podcast tonight and put this out, because it's not easy for a lot of people, including yourself, to change. You get yourself in a mindset. This is what I want to do. This is the railroad I'm going to do. This is the layout I'm going to build. But, there's something to be said about being willing to make that change to find your why. We've had Lance Mindheim on. Lance is a guy you follow a lot, like you mentioned, and finding that what lights you up, what really inspires you to model, and getting the things out of it that you really want, the checklist of, I gotta have this, or I want to see this happen. And if your layout's not doing that for you, or even your plan isn't doing that for you, you got to be able to change. You got to be able to ebb and flow into something different. And you're seemingly willing to do that.
Yeah, definitely. And it was a little difficult, to kind of put the Lamoille Valley, back in the box, back in the boxes or whatever. And be like, yeah, maybe in a few years, another 5-10 years, when my, situation, circumstances change or whatever. And, maybe I'll revisit it at that point. But right now it's like, that's part of it. I mean, you have to be open to new things. You can't just have tunnel vision, because you'll miss so many opportunities. And that's one thing in the hobby. I try to stay as open-minded as possible, because if not, you can miss out on so many things, and I felt like if I hadn't had my eyes open like that, I kind of would have glossed over, like some of the pictures. And to be honest, at first I kind of did. There was some excitement there, and it was really cool, but I just felt like it almost wasn't, it was almost enough, but it wasn't quite enough yet for me to like kind of fully jump in and commit.
So what pushed you over the edge? What was the point where you said, okay, now this is it. This is the layout I'm going to build?
Well, again, it was another text from you saying,
I'm getting in trouble with my texting here, huh?
Yep, you are fully responsible, Ray.
Oh boy.
No, it was a text from you saying, what are you doing Monday, July 3rd?
Right.
Yep. And I'm like, nothing that I know of. Why? What's going on? And you said, do you want to take a ride down to Allentown with me?
Yeah.
And so I'm like, absolutely. Let's go. 100%.
Yeah. So that was a marathon day. So we left out of here early that Monday morning, and let me back up. About 2 weeks prior, I was down there for work, and I had done some late afternoon and early morning rail fanning down there. And I found that like a really cool spot. It was like in a cornfield, and nobody really bothered me. Put the drone up, caught traffic coming through, good traffic too. I mean, here in the Northeast, you and I are both living in Eastern Connecticut. We see the P&W maybe once a day.
Yeah.
Some local stuff. And if you travel a little bit farther, you can go up to Worcester and see them switch the yard there, or, maybe go out to Rhode Island and watch them run up and down. Although most of that's night work, except for the stuff that comes out of Valley Falls and on and on. But it's really not, we're not in a metropolis of massive model. Prototypical, we're not in an area where we see a whole lot of prototypical railroading, certainly not that class 1 traffic, unless again you head up north or you head to the west. And we head out to the west, and boy, you see some traffic, and it's cool to see something different too. I've seen a lot on the river line for CSX, but to go out and see this on the Reading line and see nice amount of NS units. So I definitely wanted to get you out there and get you to see what I had seen out there. So we head out, and we had a really nice day. So tell us, I know about it, but tell the rest of the folks of what we were able to explore along that line.
Yeah. So, we left. Geez, I think I got to your house for 5 a.m, and I think it was by 8:30 after a couple stops too, but still right around 8:30, 9 o'clock, we were right down in Fogelsville, right outside of Allentown, Pennsylvania. And we pulled right up to, the yard there in Fogelsville, which is called Chapman Yard. We pulled right up to, like on the road, right at basically the entrance of the yard. And there's a small little, mobile trailer. That's the yard office. And there's a faded sign that says Norfolk Southern Harrisburg Division Chapman Yard. It's all faded and it looks, super cool. So of course I was snapping pictures of that, and sitting out on the siding was GP38-2 and SD40. And that's, their power. That's their power that they use. And I was immediately, once I saw it and I saw in person how kind of compact everything was, but in like a rural, not a rural. Yeah, I think that's rural. Like in a rural area, it was really cool. It really kind of like hit me, and I'm like, all right, this is cool. This is cool to see it in person. And while we were kind of standing there, you flew up the drone, and, a car pulled in, guy got out, a little safety vest on. So we're like, all right, cool. Wow, this is great timing. They're actually going to, do some stuff today. And then a few minutes later, another car pulled up, another person got out, and vice versa. And they were kind of talking, went into the office, and we're like, all right, what do we want to do? Do we want to stick around and watch them? Or we actually took a little ride down about 8 miles south down to Albertus, Pennsylvania. That's where the CNF secondary joins the Reading main line. And it's a neat little interchange down there, a neat little junction. You and I went down there, and of course it's a 2-track main line, but then there's also the 3rd track that connects to the CNF secondary, and that's the interchange track. And there was a cut of cars sitting out there.
Right. Yeah. It was like kind of like trying to, we saw that and kind of decoding, like, how does this all work? How do cars get from the Reading main line up to the CNF, up to Chapman Yard, and how are they doing it? And we were able to actually, timing is everything, as I say multiple times on the podcast. We shoot down just a little bit, and we find them. We find that local crew.
Yeah. Yep. We found the local crew, and the cars that we saw sitting there were actually still like being worked on and like dropped off by the, by the interchange train coming out of Allentown.
Right.
And, of course, you and I were talking back and forth, trying to figure out how exactly we're going to do it, because up in Chapman Yard, there were maybe only 3 or 4 cars sitting in the yard.
Yeah.
And it was pretty interesting to see how it all played out. Like on the head end of the cut of cars, there was actually another locomotive, another GP38-2.
Yeah.
And, we were kind of scratching our heads trying to figure out, why is that? Are they swapping out engines? And turns out that what you and I figured out was they actually use that for kind of like push-pull power to get the cut of cars. They came down light, and then they were able to push-pull back to Chapman Yard.
It seemed to make the most sense, didn't it? That was what they were doing. They leave that power down there, tie it down on that siding, and then they leave that string of cars for the local, and then the local comes. And what was neat is that they push that that power back up the C&F. The local does. They put it up that branch, and they kind of sat there for a while. I mean, almost painfully, because I was trying to get this I thought I'll get a real low shot. There's like this tractor dealership that was right next to it. It's like kind of these neat scenic idea, and I'm sitting on the ground, and I think we were speculating that the crew was just probably laughing at us, like, hey, let them sit there for a while, we're not going anywhere. And so I was like, at least turn the headlights on so it makes it look like they're moving or something. And it just sat there. But yeah, it's kind of neat, and we'll go into going back up to the local, but just decoding what they're doing, because we model, and sometimes, the stuff that they do prototypically doesn't translate to model railroading. But in a case, a lot of this stuff does. Like that was kind of the talk the whole time, wasn't it? It was like, I see what they're doing. You could do this, Joe. You could do this, right? You can you can shove up the branch and leave it there. You could have a third siding. You could have, even you could emulate the local or Alberta. So it was just so many really neat options.
Yeah, it really was. And I think one of the things that surprised me the most was the fact that how much the prototype avoids using runarounds, because they could have easily came down there with their engines, gotten out on the main, done a runaround to hook on the, the back end of the train or whatever, and push the cars back up the branch line. But it's just crazy. It's like like a lot of people say, and like runarounds, the rail prototype hates them, because it takes too long and it requires tying down so many cars, and for whatever reasons they avoid them, but it was super cool to see and speculate, and just to see how they did it. And then once you sat back and you thought, once it clicked, you totally understood why they were doing it the way they were doing it. It's like, oh, that's a lot more efficient. That makes a lot more sense.
Right.
Just like swapping out engines almost every day or whenever they get an interchange, it works out that way. Good for them. So,
yeah. So July 3rd was kind of a weird day, because, this year it was a Monday here in the United States, and July 4th obviously is Independence Day. So it was kind of like a quasi holiday. I know I had taken it off and you have Mondays off, so it worked out for us, but I was kind of worried. We were going down there, like, how much are you going to see? Because some of these industries may or may not be closed, but it gave us some great opportunities to sneak into some empty parking lots and, kind of be left alone, which was good. Because I imagine if we would have gone down there any other day, there would have been a few that we probably couldn't have got into, like Sappy Paper was closed that day, but we got to see all that. So really neat opportunity. So talk about, when we get out of Albertus, and I think we found some lunch. We had to travel quite a bit to find a bite to eat, but once we were able to get out, because all those places were closed too. It was like kind of weird. It was like we were going by. It's like, oh, this looks like a good greasy spoon. Oh, it's closed. Oh, it's closed. So we finally find a Subway, and we have a sandwich there, and then we head back up. So tell us a little bit about the revisit back to the C&F.
Yeah, so after we had our lunch, we found a place to eat and had our lunch. We headed back up to Chapman Yard, and it was, again, perfect timing, because as soon as we pretty much pull up to the yard, the crew is just arriving back in the yard with their cut of cars that they just got down in Alberta. So, again, the timing worked out great. We got to watch what they were doing, dropping the cuts of cars. They were doing a little bit of classifying or blocking in the yard. It looked like everything was pretty much blocked, well, like in Allentown, down like the hump yard. But they pretty much put it on each track for kind of like each leg of the line. There's the north line that goes up to like 84 lumber. And then there's the line that branches off, which is called the Iron Run line. That's the first branch off into the industrial park. And then there's the second line, which is called like the Schaefer line that branches off as well. And they pretty much put the blocks of cars accordingly to do so. And then again, to avoid the runaround, they used, push pull power. They had an engine on the front and an engine on the rear of the train. And then they just kind of snaked their way down into the yard. And we once we saw they were going down, I think I saw the position of the switch. It was lined for the Iron Run line coming out of the yard. So I said, oh, they're doing the Iron Run line. It looks like, a couple box cars. Let's take a ride around. So we drove around that little section of the park and we could hear the rumblings of the engine, and we found them. They were working sappy paper, which again worked out perfect because nobody was really there. So we're in a nice big empty parking lot, and we got to see the crew, and, they were throwing some nice friendly waves and stuff. And it looked like they were almost trying to ring the doorbell to sappy paper because they had like three box cars they were going to drop off, and obviously no one was home, so they just dropped the cut of 3 cars right out in front of the door.
So I took a photo of that opportunity, where they've got the train backed up to the door is closed, and I put the drone up and I take that shot, and I was going to actually name that, "If no one's home, leave at back door." It's like, it's just kind of, that they didn't stick a note on the door and say, "Hey, sorry we missed you," but they left the cars right out. It would have been neat to know how sappy paper's moving them, whether they have a track mobile or they have an ability to move the cars in and out of that building, or maybe they just got to wait for that crew to come back and push them in the building for them. I'm not sure. But nice, easy chase. I mean, they move 5-10 miles an hour. I think we measured one at one point. It was like, maybe 15 miles an hour. It was a real easy chase. We didn't have to speed. We didn't break any speeding laws, and we didn't do anything on the illegal side to bother anybody. But, it was just, really neat. It was basically like watching it was an op session, right? Just in 1-to-1 scale.
Yeah, no, it really was. And then, guesswork, trying to figure out where they were going to go next. And of course we had the scanner on so we could hear them talking, back and forth. And I swear, railroad lingo on the radio, I never understand what they're saying. You catch little pieces here and there, but we kind of put 2 and 3 together and came up with 9 somehow. But we figured out what industry they were going to next. And even though it was just right down the line, it still took us about 5 or 10 minutes to get there because we had to drive all the way around to another empty parking lot. But once we got there, they were working like a logistics warehouse for a good half hour or so,
right,
swapping out cars here and there, spotting them at certain doors, and just hearing them talk on the radio, requesting 3-point protection, engineer radioing back, you got 3, and just hearing them count down, 5 feet, 4 feet, 3 feet. It was really cool. We couldn't actually see them because they were behind like a building, but we were right there. And you could see like the engine doing the moves, and you had the drone up, so you were checking everything out.
I could see him.
Yeah,
I could see him. We put the drone up. We took some photos of that. We'll share those on the Facebook page. Some of the photos that were taken from that day. It was a great opportunity. Great weather. I mean, we couldn't have really picked a better day. It was just it worked out so well, and then to be able to see them switching. So, as you're watching this, I mean, I can only see, or think that in your mind, like, that turnouts are being placed and track is being, it's like, I can see you were kind of like putting the track plan together in your mind as this is all happening.
Yeah. Oh, it really was. My mind was, it was racing. I had so many thoughts and ideas. And I'm like, this is awesome. This is what I needed to solidify it, to like say, yes, this is what I need to do, because it was so cool just to see and like feel it, I mean,
Yeah.
to get a really good feel for the area. And again, I mean, the crew, super friendly, throwing waves and stuff, and
Yep.
waving to the drone and everything. And it was really cool. And oh yeah, I had a track. I thinking in my basement, I can use the side of the basement. I can kind of go along with my same theme that I was doing, like design, but just stretch it out a little bit, make it a little bit more prototypical. And yeah, I couldn't. Well, as much as I enjoyed being there, it's like I couldn't wait to get home to the computer to actually put it, put the plan into the program. So
Yeah, so let's talk about what the plan looks like today. After all that information we absorbed in that awesome trip and our ride back on 95 in the pouring rain, it was crazy. But yeah, we left here at 5 a.m. We got back here sometime around 11 o'clock at night, and I just couldn't wait to dive into the photos. And you're diving into a track plan.
Yeah, it was. It was quite a ride back and caught in that thunderstorm, But
Yeah.
But yeah, so the track plan that I have now, I basically used the length of one side of the basement, like 25 feet long. And on that long piece, I have a pretty good representation of Chapman Yard. I mean, it's only 5 tracks, so and it's small in size, so it's pretty easy to get that replicated. The original version that I had posted months ago, I was never really happy with it because although it had 5 tracks, it wasn't laid out how the prototype is. And now that I saw it in person and I saw how they use the yard, it made so much more sense to do it just like the prototype has, because it's basically a long siding, and in the middle of the siding is where they have 3 more tracks, like 3, double-ended tracks making up the yard.
Right.
So I guess technically it's only a 3-track yard really off of a siding. But yeah, so in the track plan, I have a good representation of that yard in size. I think on the smallest yard track, I want to say is probably about 6 or 7 feet long, which is, plenty big enough for, a couple, for a model railroad.
Mm-hmm.
And then
in compression. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And then coming off that siding there, literally the line crosses a street. The yard ladder ends right at a street crossing. And on the other side of that street crossing is where the iron run line branches off. Right. So I followed suit, doing the same thing the prototype did. And again, it just kind of naturally worked itself a way around. And that's probably about like a 10-foot peninsula that comes out, for just about 4-foot aisleway that comes out kind of like an L. Yep. And again, that's about like 10 feet in length. And that's the iron run line. And yeah, I have how many industries on that? I want to say there's like 4 or 5 industries, including Sappy Paper, including that logistics warehouse, one of the plastics company, and I think it's like some other type of like Americold Logistics, for a couple
refrigerated warehousing and that kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. And then a little bit further down, it goes back down back on the main line, the secondary main line. Goes back down to single trackage, and that's the line that goes south down to Albertus. Now, I also wanted to include like that interchange that we saw, or a close version of that interchange, just because that's so cool, and that will keep somebody busy, like going down, working the yard, going down to Albertus, interchanging. So I had to kind of work into the design that interchange at Albertus. And I also wanted the Schaefer line on there too, because there's a whole other switching line right there. And it worked out that the widest part of my bench work is actually on the Schaefer line, which is 2 feet wide, but it's only about 15 inches of switching on the Schaefer line. On the other side of that, the way I designed the bench work in about an 8-inch space is CP Albertus, where they do the interchange. I have the Reading line represented by 2 main lines and like an interlocking and a nice long siding for the cutter cars for the live interchange. And on the Schaefer line, I did freelance in industry. I threw on a team track, which is, not too far-fetched or far-stretched.
Right.
And another big shipper on that line is Coca-Cola, Lehigh Valley syrup. And they take, of course, high fructose corn syrup and the tank cars. And they actually have 3 tracks going into their corn syrup unloading facilities. So that could easily, if you do the ops right, that could keep somebody busy. That one industry alone, 45 minutes. But I kind of, scaled it back, only made it 2 tracks and about, I think, 6 car spots total. That'll keep somebody busy for about a half hour or so. And of course, I have the brewery at the opposite end as well. So it's kind of hard to describe the layout, but I'm sure there's going to be a picture posted on it.
Absolutely.
And if people look at the layout, they'll know exactly what I'm talking about. So
it's a good talk through. Hopefully folks will go over to the Facebook page and take a look at that photo and, the image of his track plan, which is very well done. And I'd say, kind of the other, real appealing part that you were mentioning is just the diversity that you have of operations on this. This isn't just an industrial park that all does one or a few similar things. There's a lot of different variety even to choose from. So it definitely gave you a great pool of candidates for operations.
Yeah, it definitely did. Definitely did. I mean, pretty much almost any and every type of industry and car, you can imagine, except for modern day, like intermodal or like auto racks and stuff like that, but yeah, I mean, plastic companies. So you have covered hoppers, the logistics companies. So you have, the box cars, the paper companies. So you can have the high cube, paper cars and stuff. And of course the corn syrup, facilities. So you'll have, the small corn syrup tank cars, and it really encompasses a lot. It really, really does. And it's just, again, it really hits on just about, it does hit every mark that I had. I mean, it's going to be enough to keep, 3 operators busy for 2 hours, probably even more if we wanted to. So it's, I can't really ask for more. So I'm really excited. And I actually was down there sweating a little bit today, working on some of the bench work. And, it was about 90 degrees, but 100% humidity today. So it was a little brutal, but yeah.
Yeah, still, it's always a little cooler when you're doing something you enjoy versus the other way around. But so wrapping up here, I really wanted to bring you on, looking at what you've done, going from Lamoille Valley to now NS and trying to chase your why. What would be your advice to a listener right now who may not be 100% happy with their layout, or maybe they've got a track plan that isn't hitting every, checking the boxes or checking enough boxes for them? What would be your advice to them?
Yeah, that's another great question. Take a step back and open your mind a little bit more. Be more open to things that you might have shunned, or, because like I said, with this, I was just about there. I thought this would be really cool, but it just, something wasn't quite hitting it for me. And that kind of brings me to the next thing, which actually feel like I'm plagiarizing Lance Mindheim again, but he had a blog post back in May about doing a site visit. And I mean, that's what solidified it for me, was the site visit, because I got to be there. I got to see it. I got to breathe in the diesel fumes. I could feel the ground rumbling as they, notched up, to pull a long cut of cars. And just, stepping out of the comfort zone a little bit, I mean, because honestly, I mean, if you hadn't, sent me that text, I probably never would have made that drive down there,
Yeah.
but I'm so glad, we did. And that's all it took. So step out of your comfort zone a little bit, have an open mind towards things and find something that really, really speaks to you. Because that, I mean, ultimately is what's going to lead to the motivation and the desire to get the layout up and running.
Yeah, and and that we're fortunate, and you're fortunate that that the railroad still exists. And I know that was kind of a selling point for you as well. Unfortunately, we can't go back and see the Lamoille Valley run anymore. And but there's there's a good way. There's other ways of doing it. If it's a railroad you can't go visit, do the research, check out the historical societies. Look for YouTube videos, look for the photos, and try to learn as much as you can about it. And that definitely helps when you're building a layout of something and you have some that information that you've built up through all that research. It definitely it's more, at least to me, seemingly more rewarding. Now, my railroad's a proto freelance and mostly heavy on the freelance side, but there are some industries, and I know that's how they do it, and it's really cool when you can emulate, because it's essentially what we're doing. It's a simulation.
Right.
We're simulating what railroads do, and when you can see it in person and then be able to go model it and then do it, there's something really cool about that.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I can't wait to have the first op session to kind of like bring the layout to life, to kind of recreate what we saw that day, and that's like, even with my scenery, I want to do summertime scenery, to recreate that day. And I just can't wait to get to that point.
Well, you'll have to get yourself a 2021 Ford Explorer white, put it in a parking lot that's empty, and we can say that was us that day. Maybe get a drone up in the air too, and we can do that. So,
absolutely.
Joe, I want to thank you here for coming back on Around the Layout and sharing your new story, and I certainly look forward to seeing what you're able to do with the Norfolk Southern C&amp.
Absolutely, Ray. It was my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me on, man. It's been a great time as always. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Around the Layout. Learn more about today's show on our Facebook page, facebook.com/Around the Layout. Show your support by becoming an operating crew member at patreon.com/Around the Layout podcast. Past episodes and more can be found on our website, aroundthelayout.com. And send us your feedback, aroundthelayout@gmail.com. Thanks for hanging out with us around the layout.